record on this computer. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Jenny McFarland. I'm the bird conservation biologist on staff for the Tucson Audubon Society and the coordinator of many important bird area surveys, but in terms of this meeting for the winter grassland meeting surveys. Now, these surveys are a lot of fun. We do them every year, and I'm going to cover that in my little talk in a moment, but this will be our second round of surveys in the winter, January and February of 2023. And we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. So some of the logistics here are rather important, actually. So even if you have done these surveys with us for many years, this first part especially is really quite important. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Share screen two. Okay. All right, so we are going to be doing our winter grassland surveys for February of 2023. Now, these are all bird surveys. We do record all species, not just sparrows, to all species, hawks, anything that we detect, ravens, anything on our surveys, but our real emphasis, our real target bird are chestnut-collared longspurs, and we're going to talk about them specifically as well in terms of why they're important and how to identify them. But first of all, the really important logistics, this planning meeting is for two surveys that are happening later this week. The Wednesday, February 1 survey of Las Ciénegas Grasslands. And so there's two different sign-up groups for this, but a lot of the survey logistics are going to be the same in terms of how we do the surveys. But if you're in that, if you sign up for the Las Ciénegas Grassland survey, February 1, we will be meeting at 7:30 a.m. at the Empire Ranch House. Those surveys tend to go till it's not always the same, and we're doing some new protocols this time, so it might be a little bit different. But they usually wrap up around noon or 1, so I would suggest perhaps bringing some lunch foods with you. And then our Saturday, February 4 survey of the San Rafael Grasslands. This is a different location, and for that one, it's a little further away. We'll be meeting in the town of Patagonia at Gathering Grounds Cafe at 7 a.m. So if you're signed up for that meeting, and I will be sending out detailed follow-up emails today on to both groups of surveyors about this, along with a link to the video of this meeting that we're having right now. So for all surveyors, you do need to bring warm layers, that you need to dress in warm layers. We tend to start out quite cold. The weather looks pretty good for this week, but it does tend to start out quite cold in the morning, but then often by the time we're done, some years we're down to just t-shirts. So it really does warm up throughout the day. So I would wear layers that you can remove throughout the day. You're going to want sturdy footwear and boots. We will be walking through grassland. This is not going to be necessarily totally even terrain. We're not doing huge slopes or anything, but you're going to be not on trails. So it's going to be stints of about, 200 meters or so or more walking through grasslands. So you want nice, sturdy footwear, boots, long pants. If you have gaiters, those things that tuck your pants kind of into your boots to keep grass seeds out of your socks. If you have gaiters, this is the time to bring them and wear them, because you can get a lot of grass seeds. Or if you just have really long pants that you tuck into your socks or put over the tops of your boots, that can work as well. But just if you have gaiters, this is the time to bring them. You're going to want to bring drinks, snacks, lunch. San Rafael tends to go a bit longer than Las Ciénegas. The distances are longer for driving, so we're usually out till maybe 1, off sometimes as late as 2 p.m. for some of the teams at San Rafael. So I would definitely bring some lunchy foods with you. You're going to definitely want your binoculars for sure. And sun protection. You wouldn't think in the middle of winter, but hat, sunglasses, sunscreen is definitely pretty important. And optionally a scope. A scope can be quite useful. I would suggest, if you have a scope and you've been wanting to use it, to bring it on this survey, because they're not so useful during the transects that we're going to talk about, or the point counts. But as you're driving around through your territory, looking for all bird species, they can be pretty helpful if you see a distant raptor. There certainly can add an element of fun to the morning too, to look at some distant birds. For both surveys, I will have a data drop-off box. And what I mean by that is literally a cardboard box that I have labeled bird survey data drop-off. And at Empire Ranch, or excuse me, for the La Cienega survey, I'll show the crew in the morning, but I do kind of put it off to the side on the Empire Ranch house. And then for the San Rafael surveys, I'll put it at Patton Center by the big kiosk. But this will be a drop-off box. And I'll mention this the morning of as well. But this is so if your team wraps up on their survey and you guys are done, you're back at that end meeting point, which will be Empire Ranch House, where we started, Empire Ranch House for Las Ciénegas, and then the Patton Center in Patagonia, the Tucson Audubon Patton Center for hummingbirds, property owned by Tucson Audubon. There'll be a drop-off box where you can literally put your clipboard, your data sheets, all the stuff that I will be providing, which is clipboard, data sheets, sort of these data packet folders. You can put that in the box. So that way you don't have to wait around for me to come back or other crews to come back, so that if you are done and you want to go, that acts as like a checkout. So I know you got back safely. So that will be there for both of the surveys. And I also have had some interest in carpooling. So this will be in the follow-up email I send out as well, but just be aware, if you are interested in doing carpooling from Tucson or from Green Valley, I will have a sort of let me know in the email. But if you're feeling comfortable with carpooling again, from like we used to do a lot back pre-2020, if you're interested in carpooling, please let me know, because I know there are some people interested, and I can work to connect people on carpooling. Another sort of side project we have going that I'd like everyone to be aware of is this idea of open pipes. So we have this conservation project that we're doing, not so much related only to grassland surveys, but although these tend to be prevalent in grasslands, is this concept of open pipes. So these are standing, I have a photo right here in the bottom right. These are pipes that are literally just standing vertically on the landscape. Sometimes you see them just sort of as the corners of fence lines. Sometimes they're just posts in a fence. Sometimes they're at the edges of gates. So anywhere where people pounded a pipe into the ground and left the top open, these are a hazard to birds. Birds can fall down into them, or lizards, all sorts of creatures can fall down into these pipes and die. So this is a conservation project we have going, and we're working right now on mapping clusters of death pipes, so open pipes or death pipes, so that we can later organize work days to go out and cap them. So if you see open pipes out in the grassland, and boy, there are a lot of them in both of these sites. I have seen some at Las Ciénegas, although the BLM has capped many of them. But if you do see open ones at Las Ciénegas, or if we see them out in San Rafael, that is definitely something we would like to know about. And they're actually pretty easy to document. If you just take a photo with your phone, with your smartphone, that will embed coordinates into the photo. And then I'll have a link I'll send out to everybody on this little form we have online where you can submit the photo, and then what the pipe looks like, as well as the coordinates and date and time and all that is embedded in the photo. So if you do see these open pipes when we're out and about, just know they are a hazard to birds that we're looking to work to eliminate. So please snap a photo of those if you do see them. Okay, now let's see, what's my next slide here? Okay, so before I launch on, does anyone have any questions about these basic logistics of when and where we're meeting? Okay, good. Yes, go ahead, David.
Can't we just bring like some 10 by 10 sheets of hardware cloth to cover the pipes instead of
when you see them? That's an interesting thought, and because we're out there surveying, let's not focus on capping them when we're out there this week. Also, we're going to be coordinating with these landowners. So San Rafael is mostly private land, so right. I don't want to be doing stuff on private land. I just thought if it was a
simply an easily removable thing, so if they're using the pipes to see how deep the water is or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not opposed to that, but I don't want to direct people to do that until I discuss with landowners and BLM. So what we're planning to do is map these hazards, and then we're going to be coordinating work day. So that's Tucson Audubon's plan. But if you'd like to cap some pipes, I'm not going to certainly stop you. But yeah, I don't want to be directing people to do that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
but yeah, it is a hazard. So we have a Arizona Sportsman for Wildlife Conservation grant. We did a brochure to try to raise awareness about this. And so, yeah, we're launching into this project now with open pipes. But since we're focusing on doing the bird surveys, I think we're going to focus on that. But if you do see them, a quick photo is really very helpful to us if it gets reported to our form. But thank you, David. That is a good question. Okay. All right. So let's see here. So where we're going, the two places we're going. So this is a photo of the San Rafael Grasslands. It's a really large area, and I have a map too coming up. And this is a really interesting site where there's a lot of private land in here. There's also a fair amount of non-private. So there is Coronado Forest land, especially on the edges of the valley, and there is now a state park on the south end. So there is some public held lands, but it is a fair amount of private land. Las Ciénegas is different. Las Ciénegas is mostly BLM land, so Bureau of Land Management land, and this is some analysis we've been doing on the past from our previous surveys. This is the outline of Las Ciénegas. It's closer to Sonoyta and does have a fair amount of invasive grasses, but also some big patches of native grasses too, which is going to be quite important to our surveys. It's certainly important to the longspurs. So we have been doing these surveys for a very long time. So since 2011, we started focusing on chestnut-collared longspurs and these habitats that are really important to them for wintering. So these are a really high priority species that we're going to talk about a little bit later in detail, but they are a very high priority bird for the Important Bird Areas program. So these surveys are done. They're just not about surveys, but they're done as part of a larger effort of the Arizona Important Bird Areas program. This is one of the fastest declining bird species in North America, chestnut-collared longspurs, and they winter here. And so we have these two important bird areas. So both these areas, Las Ciénegas and San Rafael, are global important bird areas designated for chestnut-collared longspur. They're a really cool grassland obligate bird that is really, the more we look at them, they're just fascinating. So we started doing these surveys in 2011, and they were definitely tricky birds to survey. And we're going to talk about that too. Their behavior in the winter is so clumpy. They're very tied to water sources, and they seem really tied to patches of native grass species, like grassland patches with predominantly native grass and also then they move around in these big flocks too. So they're real difficult to survey for. So a good portion of our time on both these survey mornings this week will be sort of just looking for longspurs, and anywhere we find them, we're going to document them. Even anywhere along your route that you find them, through sort of your area, your territory, we're going to be documenting longspurs, because that is something we've tracked since 2011 is everywhere we have found chestnut-collared longspurs, but we're also doing two layers of more organized surveying as well. So when we started these surveys in 2011, it took us a few years to get sort of our feet under us. They're not easy birds to survey for. And we did sort of Christmas bird count style surveys at first, starting, in 2011, where we were literally sort of dividing up these grassland areas into territories for the teams, kind of like you do with the Christmas bird count, and then sort of driving around carefully, looking and listening and trying to find and count all the birds we saw, but with a focus on longspurs. But as time went on, we got a better sense of how to do this in areas that we tended to find the longspurs, and we looked in those areas a little more carefully. We also came to understand that they're really, they key in on tanks. And by tanks, I mean these cattle ponds. So sometimes they're earthen dugouts that fill with water. Sometimes they have a pump that fills them with water, or sometimes they're a metal tank where the water is leaking out and making puddles on the ground that the longspurs like to come to. So cattle tanks, or everyone in Arizona calls them cattle tanks, but I mean, they're like ponds or puddles. These cattle ponds are a really important resource for longspurs. They do drink a lot. They come in and drink quite a lot. And so because of that, we're going to really be zeroing in on that. So we've over time evolved our surveys, and we got a grant a few years back from Bird Conservancy, from Sonora Joint Venture, and we developed a more intensive, sort of repeatable protocol. And we did this in partnership with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And I mentioned that that's going to be important in a moment. So Bird Conservancy of the Rockies is a really big bird conservation group. They do bird surveys sort of all over the continent, sort of all over North America. They have been doing a lot of work with winter grassland surveys in general for multiple species, Baird sparrows, grasshopper sparrows, but also for the long spurs. So they were they'd have a lot, they have tons of staff that focus on just doing surveying and like data analysis, and they do all sorts of reports, and they're a really interesting group. And so they've helped us develop our new protocol, which I'll show you in a moment where to find that. And then we also put our own layer in here of doing sound recorders. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but they're basically automated recording units. They're little machines you put out in areas, and we've been putting them out by the water tanks, and they listen for ambient sound, and you can run that through software and see how often birds like the long spurs are coming in. And that's been working quite well, actually. So we have that layer as well. But we did some of our own, just based on our own experiences trying to find long spurs in grassland in Arizona in the winter. We started doing things like tank assessments, because the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies protocol didn't have tanks incorporated at all. So we have been in conversation with BCR, and what everyone has decided, all these different groups that survey winter grassland birds, is that it's very difficult. This is what everyone has come to the realization, that when Bird Conservancy of the Rockies did these extensive surveying through Chihuahuan Desert grassland through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and down into Mexico, they were getting really interesting data that made a lot of sense for birds like Baird sparrow and grasshopper sparrow, but their data for long spurs, chestnut color long spurs specifically, was just totally all over the place. And a lot of this just has to do with the fact that they move around in these big groups. So they're very difficult to do rigorous surveying for, and it has to do with the behavior of the bird. So then we have been doing our own ideas and conferring with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And I actually have a meeting with them next week to talk about things that we've tried that might help their larger protocol. So this is what's happening this week, is we're trying some of these new ideas that we've developed just by being out there for many years. And we're going to run this by Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and see if together we can develop something for next winter that might get a little closer at figuring out the distribution of these wintering chestnut colored long spurs, because they're very different behavior in the winter than they have in the breeding grounds, and what is required to get a good handle on them is very different from other species. So these are components that we added that we'll be doing again, sort of, we'll be keeping in mind when we talk to Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, is we added tank assessments. And if you've helped with previous surveys in the last couple of years, you know all about that. We won't be doing that this week since we already have all these assessed for the year. But so basically properties of these cattle ponds or tanks. Then we also have been doing grass species information, and we will be doing this anywhere we find long spurs. We just fill out a brief little sheet on what grass species generally are right there, with a special emphasis on whether there is non-native grasses and what percentage of non-native grasses anywhere we find the long spurs. And we did transects in January of this year, as well as last winter, but and we're not going to do that exactly this year. We're doing something a little different, but the idea of trying to do surveys that are repeatable is what we're trying to get at. So we're going to try a couple of new things that we'll then take to a discussion with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. So this is just sort of an explanation as to why we're doing this very why we're trying different things in the February surveys than we did in January. Okay, so what we did in January, what we did a month ago, as well as the last several winters, was this idea of going to tanks. So this is just a little image here. The blue marks are these tanks that seem really important for long spurs, where we've observed them coming in the past. And then we established these repeatable transects, 2-meter long, 200-meter long transects that we would walk. Each team would walk the transects in their area and record data. Now, we weren't getting a lot of birds on these. You get some sparrows sometimes, and every now and then you do get long spurs on these. But we've done several years of data on these now, and so that I think is enough to take to Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and discuss how well this works. But we're going to try some new things for this set of surveys this week, and this is also then something we can take to Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and talk it through. So teams will be assigned tanks. This is pretty much how this is going to go. Each team will be assigned a couple of tanks, and they will do a tank watch. So this is a protocol that we have developed over the last several winters, where a team sort of goes to a tank, and by a tank, I mean, so this is an example tank here, and this is in Las Ciénegas, south of the highway. This is one of the Davis pasture tanks that doesn't always fill with water unless it's had rain. But we often do get longspurs, even if there's no water in it. You get longspurs around here often. Most years we do get them here. So this is a good spot. And so a team will watch a tank, and this will all be a written protocol that I'm going to share, like sort of steps that I'll share with everyone, all the teams today or tomorrow. But you're going to go to each tank and you're going to watch it for 45 minutes, minimum of 45 minutes. And if you're getting a lot of activity, you can go longer, but we're going to have a protocol minimum of 45 minutes, and recording all the birds that are coming into the tank, but with an emphasis on longspurs. You're going to watch the tank for 45 minutes, and then we're going to do a transect that's going out from the tank going due west. So it's going to be walking these 200 meters at a pretty steady pace. Should take about maybe 10 minutes to walk this, or it can take longer if you're getting a lot of birds that you're trying to record. But about sort of, if you're not getting anything, it still should take about 10 minutes to walk this transect going due west from the tank. So this is a new concept. Rather than having the transects randomly placed, we're putting them at tanks, walking due west so that the sun's not in your eyes, going due west from the tank itself. So each team will have, so each tank that a team is assigned will watch the tank itself, just sort of free form, sitting, hanging out, watching the tank for 45 minutes, sort of maybe stay sort of out of sight. You don't want to be too obvious. Sometimes it's open grassland and there's nothing you can do, but certainly don't be moving around as much as possible, because these longspurs are kind of nervous. They can be a little shy coming in. So hanging out for 45 minutes to see if longspurs are using the tank. Then we're going to do transects going 200 meters, and these will be mapped out for you guys. This maps will be available to look at on your smartphone. Go 200 meters and document on a form anything you flush up. So that's a concept too, is that longspurs will sometimes sit in the grassland totally out of sight. You can barely even notice them. They're just hanging out. But as you walk through, birds will fly up and flush. And so we can document that. And then there'll be 6 of these dots near your tank. And these are going to be point counts. So as a team, you'll go to each of these dots and you will stand at that dot. You'll record on a different form. You record your start and stop, and you'll stand there for 6 minutes. And any birds, as you're standing on that dot, any birds that come within, 50 meters of that circle, any ones that flush up, anything that calls and perches, birds that fly by, anything that you detect from that point will be documented on your form. And then you'll do all 6 of these. So this is why each team is only going to get probably 2 tanks, because it's quite a lot happening at each of these tanks. But you'll also spend time in the morning as you're going to your territory. You can record. We're going to have a sheet too where we record Christmas bird count style, all the birds that you see throughout your morning. So we're going to do a little bit of the old school, like we used to in the past, just sort of kind of roaming around, kind of just birding, enjoying, birding style. Recording anything you see. And if you do happen to find longspurs, definitely we're going to record those with careful coordinates. But then just, have a sort of a Christmas bird count style checklist of the eBird checklist of the birds you encounter throughout your territory. So this is all going to be written up for you guys in a really, I think, concise way. But the main steps that are going to happen is the 2 tanks. And I'm trying to work out the timing of this so that it would not be too much for a morning. But I think we'll do 2 tanks per team. And so each team will have their tanks. They'll do the 45-minute tank watch. They'll do their transect coming from the tank, and they'll do their 6 point counts. 6 point counts that are 6 minutes each of recording all the birds. And this will give us some really nice new protocol ideas that I've discussed with people who've done these surveys for many years that we think could really give us some interesting results and potentially give us try to narrow down at what could work well for chestnut-collared longspurs, because they're such tricky birds. So I do have an extended protocol. So let's talk about that real quick. So I have a lot of information about these surveys in general, as well as the protocol that I developed in 2019 with BCR, Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and Sonoran Joint Venture, that is relevant to what we're doing, but also we're trying some new stuff. So it's tangentially relevant. But so there's going to be sort of the official 2019 protocol. I'll have a copy for each team, as well as I'll show you where this is right now. But I'll also email this link in our info summary email. But what you do is you go to our website, so aziba.org. So this is the website of the Arizona Important Bird Areas Program. We have a survey resources tab. And this is, I'm just doing this live. And then from there, you can see all the different surveys we do. But if you go down to the winter grassland, chestnut-collared longspurs survey, and I'll send this direct link out as well. But I got a lot of information here. I have some videos. I have a lot of stuff. But the real important one here is right at the top, this AZIBA Winter Grassland Survey Protocol PDF download. So this is a PDF of our 2019 protocol. And it opens up as this nice document that I put together. And it talks about why these surveys are important, what's going on, how do you tell longspurs from other things. And this is going to be incredibly relevant in a moment. So I'm going to open this link in another tab. But that's where it is. So I have a link here on this. But little bit about longspurs, what's going on. So some of these steps we're going to be doing, but a little bit differently. So the cattle tank pond assessments, we're not going to so much do that, but we are going to do cattle tank watches where we hang out and watch for birds. But these 200-meter segments travel, transects we'll be doing, but coming directly out from the tanks, which is different than what we did before. And I will be mapping those out for everybody. And then a little bit about how to fill out the data forms. It's detailed as protocols need to be. A little bit about the different sort of tanks that we might encounter and the features of them. It's not going to be so important this time because I'm sending people to tanks that the longspurs are likely to use. But this is sort of gives you, if you're interested in it, a sense of what's going on with the different tanks. These ones here that tend to be more open do tend to be the ones that longspurs like. Fewer trees around it and a nice shallow edge because they have to walk up to the edge and take a drink. So it can't be a steep edge. But anyway, so that's the protocol talks about that. This grass portion at the end is going to be important. And I do have a printout of this for each team as well. The really, really important thing is that you know how to recognize Lehman's lovegrass. And these are some really good photos of Lehman's. And it's one of those non-native grasses that I'm starting to see everywhere. And once you learn how to identify it, you'll start to see it everywhere. But it's a grass that looks pretty good in terms of this. It's like, oh, this looks like pretty good grassland habitat. And then it's not really food at all for these birds. It's not food that gives them any sort of calorie advantage. It's like they say with celery, you lose more calories eating it than you get from the food. That's what Lehman's lovegrass is to these birds. They will eat it, but it's not nearly as nutrient helpful as the native grasses. So that's a real important thing is anywhere we find longspurs, I have a sheet for that. It's the CCLO detection sheet, which the protocol talks about. I'll go to it right now. But what percentage, your estimation of what percentage of Lehman's is in the area is really helpful. And then any other native grasses that you can identify in the area. And the guide is really pretty darn helpful. And it's these grammas especially that we'll see a lot of out there, which will be in your guide here. This blue gramma, whether it be curly and kind of eyelash-like, side oats gramma is pretty visible, pretty visually engaging and pretty easy to recognize. And then the protocol then goes into some of the data forms that I'll have for you. So this is going to be the cover sheet. This is who was there, where, what route you were doing, and what people were there. This overall species list we're going to have. So this is the sheet of kind of eBird style, all the birds that you encountered in the morning. So if you do an eBird list, that can substitute for this. Or if you do an eBird trip summary, that can substitute for this. But if you don't want to do that, this is a form you can fill out with all the species you encountered. And then our chestnut-collared longspur detection sheet we will be using. So anywhere you find longspurs, one of these needs to be filled out. And you can put 2 per side. So it's just where you had them, time, number, distance and direction, what percentage of Lehman's is in the area, and your best guess, and then other grasses, and then notes. So it's pretty simple. It's basically where you had longspurs, what time it was and date, and your sense of what percentage of native to non-native grass is in the area, because this is going to be quite relevant. So then we're skipping assessments this time, and I'm going to write this all out for you guys. But this is our transect sheet. So this will be that transect we do going 200 meters due west from the tank. So you fill out what species you detect as you walk that line, audio, visual, both, how many, and then the distance zone, as well as if you can tell male and female. But in the winter, that's less helpful. Okay, so that's the basic. So this is that long written out protocol. I will have a copy for each of you guys, but I'm also going to type out a much shorter kind of bulleted, the 3 steps that we're doing at your assigned tanks. So the 45-minute tank watch, where it has its own little data form, where you can just record as birds come in, like a flock of longspurs came in at 8 a.m. and there was 15 of them. And then at 8:10, 5 longspurs came in. And then at, 8:20, 100 longspurs came in or whatever. So we're going to track flocks as they come in. For the tank watch, then you'll do, go to my map, then you'll do the 200-meter transect. And it doesn't have to be exactly in this order, but these are the 3 things that have to happen. Doing the transect going from the tank, and then the 6 points where you're going to do a 6-minute point count sheet, just recording all the birds that you detect within those 6 minutes. So these are the 3 things we're trying. And then as you can also spend doing these like real rigorous protocols, you can also just sort of bird through the morning too, through your territory, looking for longspurs and recording all birds that you see, very Christmas bird count style, which is kind of our original way of doing things. Okay, so let me go back to my presentation. I had a little bit more to discuss in terms of why the heck this is even happening. Okay, so that's what we've done in 2019. So the reason we're trying out some of these new things, like those 6-minute point counts, which we had not done, I've done for other things, we've done point counts, but in terms of these winter grassland surveys, just so you know, this is part of a much larger effort. So what you're doing, your efforts this week are actually incredibly helpful as we try to figure out with some of these other groups what will work as a good protocol moving forward. Because this is one of those things where a lot of different bird survey groups, a lot of agencies come together in these big bird conservation meetings like Partners in Flight, where you get all sorts of, Forest Service and Park Service and all these agencies, as well as all these nonprofits like Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and Tucson Audubon will come, and all these bird biologists get together and discuss what they've tried and how it works and what we can do as a coordinated protocol moving forward. That's what we're doing tomorrow, is we're getting information to see how well this works so we can contribute to these larger discussions of how a protocol that can span multiple agencies and stuff, where we can then make big data sets where everyone contributes or multiple groups contribute, and then make these data assessments kind of like on a continental scale. So that's what we're working towards, is contributing to these larger efforts. And one of those in particular that's gotten a lot of attention, that's been really popular in the last several years, is IMBCR. So you do not need to really know this, but I just wanted you to know why we're doing these 6-minute protocols where those points are spaced the way they are. And that's because of this IMBCR, and that stands for Integrated Monitoring in Bird Conservation Regions. So this has been piloted by Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. This is one of their protocols, but has been picked up by tons of agencies. So they send out crews, and the parks, the national parks are starting to do this protocol, and the forest, and national forest, and tons of groups are working within this protocol. And that's what they are, is they're 6-minute point counts that are spaced in like a grid pattern. And then based on what you're trying to do as a study, you do a percentage of those points. So it'd be usually a much bigger block, and then they pick a percentage, but we're going to pilot this with just doing 6 of those points near a tank to see if we can get any interesting data that might work towards doing this for a winter grassland bird survey. So that's why we're doing the 6-minute point counts, is because it fits within the framework of this really popular now integrated bird monitoring in bird conservation regions, or IMBCR. So that's why we're doing it that way. And the transects have to do with an existing protocol from Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. So that's why we're doing it that way. And the tank watch is entirely a Tucson Audubon original. So we'll see how well those have been going, and I'll see if I can, I'll discuss it with these larger groups, and it might be something that they want to include into their protocols. So that's why we're doing this, is to have a really collaborative discussion with these other groups. All right, so let's talk about longspurs. They are really interesting birds, chestnut-collared longspurs. Their 4-letter code is CCLO. This is a sort of a shorthand for bird surveying. So CCLO, chestnut-collared longspur, and they're a really interesting bird that has become a big focus for Tucson Audubon, especially in the winter, and also for the Arizona Important Bird Areas program. And they are a high priority bird globally. So the IUCN, which is sort of the global ranking of birds of conservation or creatures of conservation concern, has chestnut-collared longspurs very highly ranked in terms of, because they are one of the fastest declining birds in North America. And even though they sort of remind one of sparrows, they are not sparrows, which I think ties into why that makes them kind of hard to survey for. They're not sparrows. They are in the Calcaridae family, which means they're most closely related to birds like snow buntings. So they are right in that same family as snow buntings, and their behavior, the more I read about snow buntings, it reminds me of chestnut-collared longspurs, where they really like to be in pure grassland with as few trees and shrubs as possible. The way they just sort of sit on the ground and hardly ever perch up is very snow bunting like. They will sometimes sit on fences, chestnut-collared longspurs, but I've never seen them sit in trees. I don't know, they might, but I've never seen it. And they really tend to be either on the ground. How we ever find them is on the ground, which hopefully we may flush some on a 200-meter long transect, on the ground or at the edge of a cattle tank drinking as a big chattery flock. And sometimes you see them moving through the sky as a big flock, but they're definitely not sparrows. And that is part of why I think their behavior is so different. So that $2.9 billion, the 3 billion bird study that got a lot of attention a few years back, this factors in. So grassland birds, as part of that study, were shown to be one of the fastest declining groups as a whole. So there's been a 53% decline in population loss of grassland birds since 1970. So they're one of the most sort of squeezed groups of birds, is this clade of birds, the grassland birds. So for example, 3 and 4 meadowlarks have been lost since 1970. So grassland birds, which chestnut-collared longspurs definitely are, have had a huge decline, and they are definitely in peril. So 11% of the tall grass prairie, 20% mixed grass prairie. So this habitat type in general, grassland, has really declined. I have a little chart showing this in a second. So grassland conversion continues at a rate of millions of acres per year. And what's really interesting too is that species that migrate from the Great Plains, which chestnut-collared longspurs breed up in the Great Plains, that then come to Chihuahuan desert grassland, which is where we are, the Las Ciénegas and San Rafael have declined by almost 70% since 1970. And this is just showing the different grassland types that occur in North America. So we're right here in Chihuahuan desert grassland. You're like, why is it called Chihuahuan desert grassland? Because a lot of it's in Chihuahua, but it also is in Sonora, Mexico, and comes up into Southeast Arizona, as well as in New Mexico and West Texas. So this is Chihuahuan desert grassland, and then some of these other grasslands. So the longspurs tend to breed up here in this sort of short grass prairie, basin steppe grassland, and then they winter down here. So you can see this is a map showing how much where you can find these grassland types. So this is historically where these grasslands were. You can see Chihuahua desert grassland was always pretty scattered, which makes sense, as a habitat type, but they have greatly constricted in recent times. So this is really showing a huge amount of habitat loss, which is why these birds are declining, most likely. So this is part of a larger study that Bird Conservancy of the Rockies was doing, where they were focusing on some of these areas. So they've been doing grassland work, which we've been trying to coordinate with them on in our small way within our small geographic footprint of Southeast Arizona. But they've been doing survey work in New Mexico, Southeast Arizona, and down into Mexico pretty extensively over the last 5 years, trying to figure out what's going on with these wintering birds. So they did do some work in the Sonoyta area, and that is technically a grassland priority conservation area, which is it's a designation that has to do with that it's a priority conservation area. So we are well within this Sonoyta one. So that's what we're sort of helping contribute to, is additional data in this GPCA. So I just wanted to sort of just loop you guys in on the fact that there's bigger conservation efforts at play, there's larger survey efforts at play, and that we're trying to contribute to that as the Arizona Important Bird Areas program here in Southeast Arizona. So that's what's going on with that. So longspurs are definitely a priority, and they themselves have been declining drastically. So here is their range map. They breed up in this northern tier, they migrate through areas like Colorado, and then they winter in Southeast Arizona into Mexico, New Mexico, and down into Mexico. So they winter primarily in short grass, prairie, and desert grasslands of Chihuahuan desert grassland, basically. And they have been declining a lot. So they have declined by more than 87% since 1966. And there's been an estimated 33% decline within just the range of 2003 to 2015. So definitely an imperiled species, which is just why they're such a high priority. Even though they're not listed on the U.S. Endangered Species Act, they're globally recognized as this really fastly declining bird, which makes them a high priority for us, for IBA. So this is one of those maps from eBird showing where their relative abundance is sort of in the winter. So they are here in Southeast Arizona in pretty good numbers, and then up into Texas and down into Mexico. But eBird, of course, doesn't always do so well further down in Mexico. But you can see they're really winter restricted down here. And this is also just showing where they've done. This is kind of like that other map, showing where Bird Conservancy of the Rockies was doing this really rigorous study and where they were finding birds, where they were finding chestnut collar longspurs. So they definitely had a big cluster where we're going to be in Southeast Arizona in the Sonoyta cluster, smaller cluster in Sulphur Springs, but our focus is going to be on the Sonoyta and San Rafael grassland area. But they also have a lot of wintering areas in Mexico too. So just so you know that there is a lot of work being done down in Mexico too that we're linking into this larger study. And these are our two focus areas. So the Las Ciénegas Conservation Area, National Conservation Area near Sonoyta, and then the San Rafael grasslands near Patagonia. So that's what we're up to is surveying these areas in a coordinated effort with these other groups. All right, so before we go to questions, I do want to cover real quick some of these resources that I have here on the website. So I'm back to the Arizona IBA website, and I have some information here that I'm also going to put in our info email that I'll send out later today. But this is really important that people know how to identify chestnut collar longspurs when we're out doing these surveys, since they are sort of our focal bird. And even if you're experienced with chestnut collar longspurs, if you haven't heard them yet this winter, I definitely encourage you to listen to these audio files a few times, because the way they sound and the way they move are some of the most helpful ways to identify them. When you look at ID books and field guides, or on your Sibley app or something, it talks about the triangle pattern of the tail and marks like that, and they can be pretty helpful if you see them up close. But chestnut collar longspurs can get pretty skittish, and they certainly, not to anthropomorphize them, but they act like they're very nervous. They move a lot. They hardly ever just sit there and let you stare at them. They are very active, moving around in their flocks, and which in itself can be a pretty helpful ID clue. But the way they move and sound is one of the most quick and sort of helpful ways to identify them. So we're going to talk about that. So I have these audio files here on this webpage about winter grassland birds. It also has a bunch of background. Basically what I just said about how they're declining is on here too, if you're interested in that. But it's important to listen to the longspurs. So I'm going to play this real quick. I'm going to pump up the volume in case that makes a difference. So they do this keetle-dee, keetle-dee, keetle-dee call, and they do it a lot when they're flying as a group. Thankfully, thank goodness, they're very noisy as a wintering flock. Now, when they're sitting on the ground, they tend to be pretty quiet. But when they're moving, when they're coming into a tank and they're moving as a flock because they want to get a drink, or they're moving from one area to another, when they're moving as a group, they are pretty darn noisy, which is really helpful, that they make so much noise. And they do this little keetle-dee. Two-part call. Now, that's great. That's very helpful that they're so noisy. But what can be confusing is that horned larks are also pretty noisy as they move around or as they're walking around a tank. And they also like to hang out near tanks, often horned larks. And they can have a kind of similar call. So let's listen to that. The two-part call is similar. Now, it's not that similar in the sense that it doesn't have nearly as much harmonics as a longspur call does. So longspur calls can feel a little more dynamic in terms of they're doing sort of multiple notes at once and making a harmonic. But boy, horned larks can be kind of confusing. Here's another call that they do. So it's a two-part call, deedle, 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 similar to the long spurs, but they do more of a harmonic kind of call. So it's really helpful to listen to these several times before we go out on the survey to make sure that you can tell the difference between horned larks and chestnut-collared long spurs. Now, the way they move is definitely really helpful too. And thank goodness Matt Griffiths got a really good video of a flock of chestnut-collared long spurs in Las Ciénegas. This is in Arizona, as they're flying around. And this video link is available on the website as well as in the protocol. But let's just all watch it together for a moment because it is pretty darn helpful. Okay. Stop the video. All right. So it's not that, let me share my screen again. I didn't mean to hit stop share. I wanted to stop the video. It's not so much that this video is very helpful. And it's not so much that you can get a really good look at the long spurs themselves, but the way they move, the way they sort of have this popcorn effect as a flock as they're flying, they're switching around each other. I suspect this is a predator avoidance thing they're doing. And they're sort of moving around each other and sort of popping around as a group in the sky and then calling as they fly is a super helpful trait. And watch this video a couple times and I think you'll see it's one of the most helpful things in terms of knowing that, yep, that those are long spurs that flew up as I was walking my transect, or that we saw when we were parked on the side of the road trying to see, these other birds, and these birds flew up, or we were watching the tank and these birds flew in to get a drink. Because as they come in to drink, they do this thing where they'll sort of swirl over the tank and almost like providing a visual cloud of cover against, I assume, it really seems like they're trying to baffle predators like falcons and things by flying as a group. And then you'll watch a few of them will come down and drink a percentage of the flock and then fly back up, and then they kind of take turns getting a drink while the others provide this flock of visual cover to baffle predators, to baffle a merlin or something that might grab one of the long spurs. So let me look at my list. I think that is everything. So let me just go touch on the logistics just again. Let me pull that screen up, and then we're just going to open this up for questions. So let me pull up this right here. So here's those logistics again of when we're meeting and where. I will be sending out a follow-up email with a recording of this video, as well as sort of again iterating where we're meeting and when for each of the two surveys, and then a protocol document I'm working on right now for these 3 steps that we're going to do, where for each tank you're assigned, you're going to do a tank watch, just sort of hang out and watch for birds coming in for 45 minutes. Then the 200-meter long transect going due west from the tank. And then those 6 points where you're going to do a 6-minute point count where you stay stationary and record all the birds that come within, 50 meters of you for those 6 minutes. Just do like a timer on your phone. And this is going to be super, super helpful for us to then have a discussion with these other conservation groups to see if we can develop a way to get at these really, really tricky birds. Long spurs are really tricky. And honestly, one of the best ways we found is just sort of going to these as you encounter them along the route, recording where you find them. But that is not really a repeatable protocol. Kind of Christmas bird count style isn't very repeatable. But when so many groups have had these problems where we do these transects and you don't detect the long spurs officially, but they're there because as you're moving around for the morning, you're seeing these flocks, or you're seeing them come into tanks, which is why now we're focusing on tanks, which no other group has done. So this is a new thing that we're trying, that we're going to bring to the group and see how well everyone thinks. Maybe if other groups should try this too, depending on how well it goes for us. So I'm not sure how to unmute people on this bigger thing, but if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, let's go ahead and do that.
Hey, Jenny.
Yes.
Yeah,
Susan.
this is Sue. Yeah. So what is the long-term goal or the usage of the information that we'll all be collecting and that has been collected for a number of years? How will this information be used for management, or changes in management or whatever? What's the long-term goal?
That's a really good question. And that's part of the reason that I'm going to all this effort to try to do something that where our data can be part of these larger data sets that are being collected by groups like Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, because they work a lot with land agencies, a lot they work with, and they, are in a position to influence things like land management decisions and changes. And this is also something that I work with Las Ciénegas. So I'm part of their bird conservation, like their wildlife conservation committee. And I do go to their conservation meetings, and they're very interested in this data and what we're finding. And they are on the ground right now doing ground sort of grass restoration practices, trying to see what is going to bring some of these native grasses back. So when you're out, this is another thing I meant to mention, thank you for asking this. When you're out in Las Ciénegas, if you're on the Las Ciénegas team and you're doing surveys and you see these like scrapes in the ground where it looks like someone took a bulldozer and just scraped a couple of feet and made like a little tiny berm, like why is this out here? That is an effort that Las Ciénegas is doing. They're trying different things to try to create a condition where native grasses can outcompete the non-native grasses. So they can't really spray for the non-native grasses. You kill all the native too. So this is a technique they're trying to try to bring back some of these native grasses. And a lot of this has been because these groups like our bird survey data showing that native grasses are better for the birds is contributing to the fact we're even doing these efforts. So one, we have been in coordination with Las Ciénegas in terms of where we're seeing long spurs and what kind of tanks they prefer, how that can influence management decisions. But also then we're trying to make data that clicks into these big data sets that come up at these big national bird conservation meetings where the land managers are in the room. So we are trying to be part of that larger discussion. And then we're also being part of a smaller discussion directly with Las Ciénegas, with the BLM. So yeah, this is all going to be contributing to larger discussions of management. Yes. That's your question. It's a little convoluted. Yeah, Ray.
Sometimes I've had the experience approaching a tank in a car that you see there are birds there, and if you stay in the car kind of functions, as a decoy. These birds are skittish, and they're often in grass and they crouch, and so ID can be an issue. So sometimes the car can be a useful decoy. On the other hand, if you stayed in the car all the time, you'd be sacrificing, seeing birds overhead or in the area, or maybe hearing sounds at a distance. So I was just curious about other people's opinion and experience about staying in a car, using a car as a decoy. If 4 people get out and you try to stay still, you still have 4 people that are somewhat moving around. So I was just curious about other people's experience in that regard.
I have heard from a few people, but does anybody have a direct experience they want to share? Okay. Yeah, I have heard from a few people. So I was actually going to put this in the protocol that I'm going to leave it up to the discretion of the team, because some tanks you can't even drive up to, right? Some you have to walk up to, so it's not an option. So I don't want people to think they have to sit in their car, but some tanks you can drive right up to, and it's great to watch out the windows for a little while. So I think I'm going to sort of leave that at the discretion of the team and suggest it if possible for at least a portion of the time. But you're right, you miss some of the overhead stuff then. You can't hear as well either from inside the car, but the birds are definitely often less freaked out if you're in the car because they're used to cows coming to the tanks. And I assume the car just looks like another giant cow at the tank. It certainly doesn't look like a predator to them. And that can be really pretty helpful in getting a sense of what's going on. So I am going to mention that, and then going to ask people to note whether or not on the form if they were in their car or not. But it's just not possible at some tanks, but it is possible at others. So yeah, if it's possible and your team thinks like it's a good idea, I definitely that is fine. It's fine to do a portion of the time from inside your vehicle, because I do think it can be helpful. And so I'm gonna add a thing on the data form where you can just indicate if you're in the car or not.
So, Jenny, I'm curious about the point count, the 6-minute point counts. In the thing you were showing us, it said that point counts kind of supplement survey data by showing the probability of detection or whatever. It sounded kind of weird. And, having done these surveys before, it seems like standing in one place for 6 minutes is not likely to have tremendously high yield compared to tank counts or even transect surveys.
Right.
But it sounds like you're trying to fit yourself into what the other groups do. And so there's a whole logic behind it. Maybe it would be helpful
That's
just
exactly
to know what.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think point counts are the best way to approach this, which is why we're only going to do a few. You know, I want to get enough so that I can come back to these other groups and be like, hey, we tried this unified protocol that everyone's using, and we have an opinion on whether
Hello?
or not this works well for this species and in winter grassland conditions. Because a lot of groups use it for other things, but yes, exactly. Because I know the first thing they're going to ask me is, did you try this point count thing that everyone's doing? So I can say, yes. And this is the success rate we had, you know, so that's why we're trying it now so that it can be part of the larger discussion. Because if it does work well, it'll actually click into this huge effort that many groups are doing. But I don't, we'll see how well it works, but I have a suspicion on how well it's going to work. And I will also be having a survey for all of you to ask how you think these different things worked. Because what I'm really hoping we can do is that all these groups at the end can sit down and discuss what is a winter protocol that we think will work well for chestnut color longspurs. Is it the transects going out from the tanks? Is it the transects that are just sort of randomly thrown across the grassland, which is what we did in January? Does a tank watch work really well, which no one else is doing, but I'd like to pitch that to these groups. But we got to sort of try the point counts and see how well this works. And then being near the tanks, it could work pretty well, actually, but we'll see. Okay. Does anyone else? Oh, I see a, yeah, so I have a question about folks on teams. So I'm going to try to keep teams to about 4 people or fewer so that it can be a vehicle trotting around. Because there's a lot happening in each of the tanks, I can sort of do more teams of fewer people. And so I'm going to be trying to make this about 4 people per team. So, and I will be assigning the teams today. So you'll be, it's for Los Angeles, information will go out today on the different teams, and then a little later in the week for the Saturday San Rafael survey. But yeah, I am going to try to limit it to 4. If it's more than that, I'll discuss that with the team. But yeah, I'll be trying to keep it to about 4, because I think more than that's just unwieldy, especially trying to point counts and stuff. So I think 4 is a nice tight group, and some of the teams may end up being a 3 or something, but it'll be probably, I think 4 is a good number. So that's what I'll be shooting for. Okay. Anyone else? So I'll be sending really detailed follow-up messages to especially for Los Angeles people today, and then for San Rafael as well, with this recording, information about the 3 steps we're doing in each of the tanks. And then and I'll have really detailed, and any protocol stuff I send you guys, I'll also have printouts for each team. So each team will be given a clipboard, the different data sheets that you'll need in their own little pack, like little folder packets, and then sort of a printed out, this is what we're doing today thing. Because I know this is kind of unusual, but I really appreciate everyone's efforts on this, because even if it all goes sideways for your team and you're not able to do all the point counts or something, it's still helpful knowing how it went and what birds you got on the ones you did do. But I think everyone will be all right, because we're just doing a tank watch and then a 200-meter walking 200 meters in one direction from the tank, and then visiting each of those 6 spots for 6 minutes and documenting all the birds. And even if you're not getting a lot of birds, and we're having a winter where there's not that many sparrows around too, which has also been kind of an issue for us. But even if you're getting a 6-minute point count where you're not detecting any birds, the fact that happened is going to be super helpful in this discussion that we're going to have about what should be a protocol that we can all do moving forward as sort of like as a continent moving forward. So you're definitely contributing to a larger discussion, and it's really extremely helpful. So I appreciate everyone's efforts on this. And the weather looks pretty good. So either way, I think we're going to have a nice day out there. And then also there'll be time to just sort of slowly drive around looking for cool birds too. So I'm also adding that as an element of trying to make sure we capture any longspurs that are not at these tanks potentially, but also making it a fun outing for everybody as well. Just sort of looking for birds as part of the morning as well. Okay, so any final questions? Sorry, I went a little over an hour, but I wanted to make sure I covered this background information for everybody. Oh, I did not hit the right thing. Okay. Share this screen again for just the final moment here with the logistics, but any final questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. This was a really good meeting, and I'm really glad everyone came, and I will be sending out this video link. So if you watch it on video, thanks for watching it as well. And let's see here. Yeah, thank you all so much. And I think these are going to be really interesting, really fun surveys this week. So watch out for my very detailed email coming very soon. All right. Thank you all so much.